Hello and welcome to the Adventures of LBZ. I am Lance Collins. And if you're new to my channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you're new to any of my videos that I do at my work, I do not use the background audio for privacy reasons. Alright, in today's video, this is a 2001 TRX 500 FA Rubicon. I'm going to remove the carburetor, and instead of putting the carburetor into an ultrasonic cleaner, I'm actually going to put it into a bucket of S100, and that way, if you're at home, you can see that this is a way that you can clean this thing too. So the first thing I'm doing is I've already got the seat and stuff off this guy. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the vent hoses and get the air filter out of the way, and then I'll work on getting the air box out of the way, and we'll go from there. So the air box on this is actually kind of easy to get out. You have two push pins at the back side right there in front of the battery. There's two metal tabs there. I use like a pick and then to get it, to get the push pins out. And then you have basically right there on the front of the air box, you have a tube that comes up and goes to the front of the bike, and then you have a tube that connects to the carburetor. You loosen both of them up, and then there's a little tube right there that you see that I'm grabbing that's underneath of that. That actually goes to a motor, basically like the motor breather on it. You can unhook it pretty easy from there. Slide this tube up, and actually it's just easier just to go ahead and pull that clear tube out of the way and get it out of the way. As you can see, I was fighting it there for a second, and I realized, you know what, just pull it up out of there. Unhook the rubber hose on the bottom. It's got like a little squeeze clamp that you can do with your fingers. Remove it and set it aside. Now you can go ahead and remove your flange. This one actually the front part of the flange was loose already, so when I removed it, or when I grabbed a hold of it, it slid right off there. But just note the way that if you're doing this, note the way before you remove that off there that it is sitting on the carburetor, because there's a certain way that it sits in there because it's shaped a little funky. And I just went ahead and removed the choke out with a 14mm, and now removed the throttle positioning sensor off, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the carburetor itself. Let me see what I'm doing here now. Oh, that's right. This one, somebody put their own fuel line on and had basically just a screwdriver style clamp holding the fuel line onto the carburetor. So that's why I was using my screwdriver there. If you have this and it hasn't been molested yet, it probably won't have that style of a clamp on it. It'll have a I guess like an eyelet style clamp, if that's what it's called. I don't even know what it's called. I know they're called a pain in the ass sometimes. Now it's time to remove the throttle cable. There's a screw that is on the cover to where the throttle cable goes in. You remove that out, then you just pop the cover up and off, and you will need a 10mm. Unhook your cable. This one, I think, yeah, I did have to use a 10 on it. Sometimes you get lucky and somebody didn't tighten that nut up and you can spin it out of there, but most of the time they're tight. Yeah, I went ahead and used a 10, loosened the lock nut up, twisted the cable up, got it out of the way. Now I'm going to go ahead and get this carburetor up and out of there. So easiest way I found is, I'm trying to remember what I did here. Oh, I gotta unplug the heater for the carb. So yeah, it's over there. Let me go ahead and get this unplugged first. I use my pick, get in there, open the little connector, pull it out, and then pop the, there's actually a little tab on the frame there that basically a zip tie that was on the frame there. I popped it out of the way and pulled the carburetor out, set it down there on the bench, and we'll go ahead and get my tray out so I can tear it down. And now to unscrew the actual primer plunger. There's 2 screws in that. We'll go ahead and undo that. And when you undo that, there will be a spring that is underneath pushing up against it. So just be careful that you don't lose that. That one stayed in. And we'll go ahead and get the bowl off now. There's 4 screws that are in this. Make sure that whenever you are removing any screws from this carburetor that you have a good sharp screwdriver that doesn't have any kinds of imperfections on the tips, because the screws that are in these carburetors are very soft. And if you don't have this carburetor kit that I'm using, you know, you might have to go buy new screws to put back in it. Luckily, the All Balls kit does come with all new screws to put back in the float bowl and the top piece that covers the diaphragm itself. And it's 100% necessary to have a Fruity Pebbles Kit Kat to work on this carburetor. No. I ended up having to get a little different screwdriver because somebody had already been in this and tore up the screw. So I'm trying to get it out with a different screwdriver, and I did get it broke loose. And if I wasn't going to be able to get that undone like that, I have a pair of pliers that I use that are made by a company called Vamp Plier. And you can actually grab the screw. It tears the screw up pretty good, but it grabs it and you can spin it out with a pair of pliers, essentially. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove, you know, the jets, the float, the little rubber stopper. You'll need a 7mm wrench and a nice sharp straight screwdriver to get the jets out of here. This stuff was already loose in there. As you can see, I'm going, what the hell? Yeah, it was about to fall out. So whoever did the carburetor work on this one before probably shouldn't be doing that, because you left the jets loose. Not only was the main loose, but that was not very tight either. Things you can leave on this carburetor. You don't want to remove the TPS. You can leave the carb heater in. You don't have to remove it. Let's see. There's like a little 90 elbow on the side of it. You can leave it in. Yes, I'm tapping that with a little hammer because somebody installed the pin in backwards and it has grooves on one side, and I had to tap it out of there to get it out, but we got it out of there fine. If it goes in the other way, it still is tough to get out, but you can press on it with the screwdriver and it'll pop out of there. But if you put it in the way where there's no grooves there before, then it's basically like a press fit in there, so you have to bang it out. Yeah, we'll go ahead and remove the float and the float needle. Now I'm going to go ahead and get the diaphragm off the top. You'll have little clamps like that. I just removed it out of there. Note where they go. That way you can put them back in the correct positions there. You know, the holes will The bolts will fit in any 4 of those holes, so whether your hoses are in the correct spot or not, afterwards is up to you. And when you remove the last screw, there is a spring that is underneath that cap that you just saw. I'll shoot the cap off there, so just be careful you don't lose anything whenever that thing pops out of there. You can remove the diaphragm. See, there is a little tab on the diaphragm that matches the tab on the carburetor, so that whenever you put it back in, you line that tab back up and then put the cap back on with the spring and the 4 screws. I'll go ahead and tighten down the air fuel screw. You'll want to go ahead and, when you're tightening it down, note the turns that you're doing. That way you can set it back to that whenever you're done. So I'll turn it down until it stops. I'll write down how many turns that was. And then when I'm done, I'll screw it all the way back in and turn it back out that many turns. When you remove this air fuel screw, it's going to be air fuel screw, spring, metal washer, and then little tiny O-ring. If you do not see all of that stuff, then chances are, which 99.95% of the time, the O-ring and the little washer, you'll have to get a pick, and you'll actually have to help them out of its hole. Which that's what I'm doing now. Next, I'm going to go ahead and drain this tank and get rid of any of this old fuel that's in there out of it. Put some fresh stuff back in there so that after I get done rebuilding this carburetor, I don't have any nasty gas to stick the float or clog any of the jets that I just put in there. And I'll add some Honda fuel stable treatment to the fuel tank. That way, if this thing sits after it leaves the shop, the fuel has some kind of treatment that we're putting back in it. And I'll go ahead and pour some out for my homies. That was probably like $10 worth of fuel nowadays with the fuel prices. All right, so I went ahead and basically I have soaked this thing in a bucket of the Honda Bright, or you can use S100. And once you remove it out of the bucket of that cleaner, that has nothing but that Honda Bright in it. You want to take it over to a sink with hot water and run through everything. Yes, even the sensor that is in there is fine to get wet. It was submerged in the tank. It's not going to hurt it. It is a sealed up unit. Unless you have damaged it, and broke the casing or something on it, you're not going to damage it by cleaning it in that. What I'm using there is some Scotch-Brite, and I'm just trying to clean out the very bottom of the float bowl, get the grime out. Same thing with the lid here. We'll go ahead and we'll wipe it out. We'll take the Scotch-Brite, any spots that had any crusty stuff on it, we'll go ahead and we'll scrub those, get it cleaned up, get hot water rinsed out there good. And like I say, whenever you're pulling that carburetor out, it's very important to rinse it thoroughly with the hot water and then take it and blow air through all the orifices on the carburetor. Blow any of the water, or if there's any cleaner left in any of them, it blows it out. Also, if there's anything that's plugged up, that stuff has worked on it, and you'll be able to blow any of the debris that is in any of them holes and orifices to the carburetor out, and the carburetor will flow correctly. Now, when you take these out, there's actually a little seat that goes in where the needle slides through the carburetor itself. You want to make sure you put that in, and then put the emulsion tube back down in, and it basically presses it and seats it back into the carburetor correctly where it needs to be. Tighten that back down with your 7mm wrench. Do not tighten it down too tight because they break very easily, carburetor and that tube. So you just snug it down a little bit. You don't have to crank on it because it's 7mm. It's not like a 58mm. You don't have to put 1,000 foot-pounds. It kills me, man. People work on these things, and then you get a hold of them. They either leave them loose, or they just hammer them into the carburetor where you have to extract them, or you end up having to put a new carburetor on it. We'll go ahead and get all this all balls carb kit laid out here. And some things I don't use. I don't use the needle that comes in there. The one that comes from Honda, it works the best. I've tried those in there, and for where we're at, it just doesn't carburate correctly. They kind of stumble. So nothing against them. It just could be where we're at, and the ATVs do not run correctly with that needle. But yeah, we're putting the jets in now. I've put the pilot jet in. Now I'm putting in, I don't even know what they call this little guy here, like a bleed jet, I guess. Yeah, I think it's a bleed jet. Putting that guy in. Make sure that you're putting the correct one in. Sometimes these kits will give you 2 different sizes, and that also in your main jet, they'll give you 2 different sizes a lot of times. I went ahead and put the new rubber plug back into the top of the bleed jet there. But yeah, just make sure you check your sizes, whatever you pulled out. Now, if you notice that your bike, not to say that you're not going to go, oh, I'm going to put the bigger jet in there, it's going to run better. Not in all cases, depending on where you're at. But yeah, if you have the smaller jet in there and that thing feels like it's lean, then yeah, put the bigger jet in there and see if it runs better. If it doesn't, you can always put the other jet back in there. And then we'll go ahead and we'll get the float and float valve back in. This is a fixed float. There's no adjusting, so if it's wrong, you got to replace the float. Before I put the float needle in, though, I take a little bit of Scotch-Brite. I put down into the actual hole of the where the needle sits for say, and I just turned it lightly. I did not want to keep sitting there forever and do it. I just did it enough to get the roughness out because there was a lot of corrosion down in there, and it basically just polishes it up. But if you press too hard and press the screwdriver down in there too hard, you will damage that. So if you're going to do that, don't do it the way that I just said it unless you know you're not going to press too hard and damage it, because once you damage that carburetor is no good no more. You have to buy a new one. So yep, I went ahead and cleaned that out, blew some air through it. Now I'm going to put it in this float, stick the float down in there, stick the needle or the float pen needle back through, put it the proper way so that it lines up with the grooves that are in there, and you tap it in just a little tiny bit. You don't have to force it in there like where you're smashing it in, but yeah, we'll get that in and get the new gasket onto the bottom of the float bowl. Actually, you know what? I got to put the air fuel in first. So, yeah, we'll put that back in. When you put it in, remember, spring. Then you're going to have the washer and then the O-ring on the very end. If you have that in any other way, you're going to tear the O-ring. Now, there is an O-ring on the very end of the air fuel screw itself. Make sure you put that on. That one was there. I set that back to the same turns that I had it set to whenever I pulled it off. That way you have a good base to tune it if you have to. Usually, though, if you do that, it's pretty damn close. I put a little bit of grease on there. The reason why I do that is basically to hold this brand new O-ring in spot, because there's not really any places for it to catch. I don't know if you can see that, but the carburetor looks like it's dirty, but it's not. That's actually the fuel that has ate the carburetor. It started to pit the inside of the bowl there. So this new ethanol fuel is terrible. But yeah, I'll go ahead and put that O-ring in there. Like I said, I put the grease on there. What it does is it holds it in place so that whenever I go to put that onto the carburetor, the O-ring doesn't slip out and get pinched in any way. And I'll use the 4 new screws. If there's more than, or any other sizes, it's the longer of the screws that are in there. You put the 4 new ones in, tighten them down. You don't have to kill them. If you tighten them too tight, even with a nice sharp screwdriver, you will strip them out. So yeah, tighten them down evenly, and you just get them down to the seat and give them a little tiny bit of a snug, and you should be good to go. Actually, I believe the screws that come with this kit too have a lock washer on them, so when the lock washer smashes, they're tight enough. And I went ahead and installed a new plunger. It's a Moose plunger kit. It's got a new spring, 2 new screws. The one that was on there was iffy, so I said, you know what, rather than chance it, everything else is new, we'll put a brand new one on it. We have them in stock where I work, so yeah, we'll put it on. You put the spring in first, then you put the new plunger on, and the new screws. Tighten them down just like you tightened the bowl screws. You don't have to kill them. They have like a little lock washer on them too. Basically, when that thing is crushed, or pushed down, they're tight enough. And finally, we'll go ahead and put the diaphragm, I guess, back down into the carburetor. Make sure the tab is lined up. Spring is down in there. Cap is lined up. The cap will actually also have a little dimple in it to where it goes, lines up with that spot on the diaphragm in there. And you'll make sure that you put your clamps and your hose holders back in the correct spot. I'll go ahead and get all that stuff tightened back down. There was new screws in the pack for those also. Those are the 4 short ones. Go ahead and put them in, tighten them down. Then what I'll do is I will test this carburetor and make sure that it doesn't leak, you know, whenever it's at the proper angle. You know, I'll tilt it, you know, different ways so that make sure the float is working so that it will, you know, go out the overflow in different scenarios. And if that tests out, then I, you know, after that, I would put it on to the ATV and go ahead and, you know, take it out for a test drive. But, yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I'll let the rest of this play out of me assembling these here and getting the hoses back to where they need to be. But, yeah, if you are new to this channel, please consider hitting the subscribe button. There's a lot of cool stuff like this on there. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button. What I just did there is in that side, I went ahead and put some air through it, and that actually lifts up on the diaphragm. If the diaphragm is seated in the correct spot and working properly, it will move up and down. Pro tip for you guys. Alright guys, as always, have a great day, and I'm out.